So we're just talking about this term that you suggested that we trademark, but then we like did a quick Google search and like people with untold amounts of money that think about money all day have already like trademarked it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought Nick came up with the term collateral benefit.
I wish I did.
And I was strongly urging Nick to trademark the term.
Because then none of you could use it, which would be awesome.
And that's what we're going for here.
Yeah, I'm all about like
Is that,
not including anybody.
If we can restrict access
Yeah.
to what we have,
That's my ideal world. Yeah.
then I think at least we would be able to milk everything we could possibly, squeeze.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wrench from probably musicians and artists.
Yeah. I mean, what better group of people to just, get hours from?
Because maybe on initial inspection or a quick Google of either of us, they would, they'd think we're one of them.
Yeah, or they might like think we're good people, which we're not.
No.
Right.
I like to masquerade as a church choir director daddy who does some teaching and likes playing music, for kids and the elderly. But what I'm really after is money.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
That's wrong. That's a bit off the mark. What I'm into
yeah.
and what I really want, what I crave is power.
Yes. Yes. That is it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You just put your finger on what I've been feeling coming from you for 20 years now.
How's it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I put my finger. You put your finger on it? How's it feel?
It's powerful.
Throbbing? Warm to the touch? Pulsating with power. .edu.
You are throbbing with power. Whew. All right.
But I did think that there was merit to the term collateral benefits.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a huge term because it's like there's not a lot of things that come easy to like anybody in any part of life. But one thing that's really cool about music, and I guess you could apply this to a lot of other parts of life, but you're consciously working on like a skill or going down a path, and you work really hard on it. You let it envelop you. You give it your entire being. And then sometimes you actually come out of it with a completely different skill that you weren't even trying to cultivate. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where I was coming from when I that was the idea in my head when I put that term to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think even when we practice something good that we want to practice and we're excited about it, like in the rest of life, we're consumed with anxiety about what we're not practicing.
Right.
So like it really makes our practice goals pretty frantic sometimes when we think we're neglecting all this other stuff by doing one thing. We usually don't see those little secret gifts coming at us when we can just focus on one thing.
Right. It makes me pivot way too fast. Like I actually even know that about myself and have known that about myself for a long time, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Unfortunately, knowing that about myself doesn't mean I won't do it.
Yeah. And my tendency is the other way. I'll be like, I can just practice these 2 or 3 things for a good decade, and that'll really pan out. And it does, but I get really content with practicing certain things and never really see the end of the tunnel there. So I have to almost force myself to do something new, because it feels like any one of those things could never be done, and they're
right.
Been doing them long enough, they just keep unfolding, and
right,
which is cool.
Yeah.
The more I describe it, I'm like, well, maybe that's good.
Do you ever do anything though where you like place just an arbitrary timeline on something? Do you ever do that?
Within the day or like macro
Uh,
timelines?
I guess
Like,
both. So would you ever, have you ever been like, I'm gonna work on this for 2 weeks and then I don't care where I'm at with it. I'm gonna do something else.
no, I think I need to do that. That's exactly the little voice I need to speak up
Mm.
in my brain. I do that in the day, like I'm super okay with moving on to the next thing after my 10, 20 minutes, whatever felt good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I like moving on.
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel like pained by the state I left something in.
Mm.
But I should give myself more macro goals. A couple
Well,
weeks of something, a couple days of something, and then create a larger rhythm in my practice.
yeah, it's just like anything else where there's probably a lot of benefits to that and probably a lot of drawbacks. So the benefit I see is that you're in a way detaching yourself from the results because you have this like sort of line in the sand, like I'm just gonna do something else. Like when Friday ends on the second week, that's it. I've already made up my mind. I'm not going to talk myself into keep doing it. And there's probably some benefit to that, but there's probably a drawback to that where like you might have been right on the edge of a serious breakthrough or jump in ability and you just needed to see it through and let it unfold. And
Maybe. Well, this is like touching upon the theme of having to just jump in the water and do something, right? Because that reveals stuff.
yeah.
So if we hypothesize about how much time is needed to do something, that's like kind of hard to imagine up front. But if I just started practicing something, like you start to get your hands on it and you understand, you could more adequately say a couple weeks would be good.
Yeah.
Plus, like I'm viewing this hypothetical 2-week schedule as like a Band-Aid for the way I already am, like a curative element for what I feel I'm missing.
Because you feel like you're too far in the opposite direction than I am.
Which is like a fine problem to have. Like
Yeah.
that makes entertaining this 2-week schedule hypothesis like kind of intriguing rather than threatening or damaging. Because it's like I already have this like foundation of what I do, even though I can find some holes to poke in it.
Yeah.
Or like I feel like I'm missing the other side, like this other way of practicing.
Yeah.
But the fact that I have a body of work and effort, I think makes the other side of the yin yang there not that scary. But if we were having this conversation when I was 19 and I was trying to like, before I ever really spent months or years really shedding, and I was trying to find the rhythm between evolving projects and committed, like staying with a certain program for a long time, that could be, I feel I could chase my tail doing that.
You mean if you put, are you talking about if you did put the arbitrary timeline on when you were younger, that would have been bad?
Not in and of itself, but I think
Wouldn't have served you.
I would have been too young without the body and foundation of just some committed kind of practice.
Yeah.
We would have been having a conversation like this where I would have been creating anxieties about like, well, how often should I evolve through new things? And should it be 2 weeks or 2 months? And how will I balance that with the structure that I do every day that doesn't change? And how long is that? Or is that a 6-month arc or a 6-year arc? So I just blindly almost, as brass is concerned, like chops, and jazz, like data scales and chords and stuff. I practiced pretty much the same stuff for like 10 years.
Yeah.
Like frequently in the same order.
Yeah.
Same amount of minutes and rest.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the greatest chapters of my becoming. And it's through that makes me feel like I could use this. I understand why a 2-week arbitrary, like, time limit and evolving set of things could be helpful. But before I had the 10 years doing everything every day, I just wouldn't have been able to conceptualize like any of it.
Well, that makes a ton of sense. And when you were expounding upon this, like you said the thing that I think we're trying to do in the Jazz Intensive a ton, which is you said you would get so caught up in thinking about like how long should I be doing this? How long is this arc? Should I do it for 6 months? Should I do it for 8 months? What did so and so do? What did blah blah blah? And I think you luckily avoided that. I didn't. I would spend so much of my day like obsessing over that. And every time I got with a teacher who was really knew what they were doing, and I started dumping my anxiety on them, stop. Let's play. Like, let's just play.
Yeah.
You know? And that's the big thing, right? Is taking action. Like this is becoming, as we are doing this for longer, I think we're both starting to come to the realization that that's like kind of the big thing. Is so many realizations, so many good things happen through taking action. And we avoid so much of the mental torture that really at the end of the day, like doesn't do anything for you.
Yeah, it's funny. Just a bit, after you described it that way, I was thinking like super micro about that mental process. And like, it just like, it occurred to me that the metronome is the action taking implement, right? Because like the way that you will behave in a 10-second amount of time internally, as you raise the horn to your face and think about what you're going to do and let the breath out, it's probably not a great musical breath or really motivated by any urgency. Like it's not really tapping into the way you should breathe and should play and the way it feels the best when you play with other people in time.
Right.
So like just the way I pick up the trumpet and put it on my face without a metronome or without another person, there's a whole boatload of stuff that can go wrong. But like the metronome is like a certain kind of action taker, right? It means you have to, instead of just go toot, you have to go bam and like commit to the first note of what you're doing.
Wow, that's heavy.
So it like it for me, like especially with brass stuff and breath, it like if there's a metronome or that like kind of sense of urgency playing with the note, like why playing with Clark Terry was so great.
Yeah.
Because we wouldn't always be playing all this 12 key crazy notey stuff.
Right.
Or just playing a melody with him, like straight note chaser with him in a room. You'd leave that experience just blowing better. The horn would feel lighter in your hands, warmer to the touch. Like everything about it was more real.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a metronome still fails compared to that experience.
Yeah.
But like, I just started thinking about action taking by way of like super minute decisions, like the way you decide to say, rather than like, oh, here I go.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Also, I think that's brilliant. And I think there's another side to that too, where there might be some point in your life where you turn on a metronome and read a book while a metronome is on. But I think in general, like you only turn on the metronome when you're ready to go.
Yeah.
Like, okay, I am ready. I am practicing, metronome on. So it's almost in a more meta sense, it's an action taker where it's like, if this thing is on in the room, I am taking action.
It's like a little meditation bell.
Yeah.
It's like, it's time.
Right.
Ding.
Yep.
When I was using it a lot, I would just like forget about it and leave it on and go about my business.
Yeah.
And someone like Taylor, my wife, would just be like,
what
the hell is that?
Yeah.
How long has that been on? Or like, can you go downstairs and turn off the metronome?
Right.
Because I would just forget it's on.
Right. It just
or like
becomes a part of
start
your
a
life.
Zoom lesson and my student is like, is that you or me? Is that a...
What is that?
Are you outputting from Logic? Nope.
I think your signal flow is, a little caught up in your practice routine.
It's just the flow of the old Seth Thomas.
Yep. That's great. So, this always happens to us, which is totally fine. I think it's totally worth it. But if we come back to that term, actually, we've been talking about it the whole time, but collateral benefits are things where, let's say that you are trying to learn a melody. because you have to play it at a gig that night. So you use a recording to learn it rather than a lead sheet, because that's what every teacher has told you since you started playing jazz. You're going to learn the melody, hopefully, before the gig tonight. But the collateral benefit will be that if you learned it off of a recording, which is why teachers tell you to do that all the time, you're also absorbing articulation, time, delivery, sound, playing with a rhythm section. That's the collateral benefit.
And that physical technique thing is super present because that's your metronome. Like you just
right.
Should probably play that note when they play that note. So it
now the recording is your metronome.
Makes the brain or the body work a lot better.
Yeah. So is there any other
collateral benefit stuff I could think of?
Yeah. Yeah. You talk about that a little bit more?
For like days.
Awesome.
Well, what's my favorite thing to talk about? Me.
Love it.
But yeah, all those years of practicing the same stuff.
Yeah.
Those years were between 25 and 35, so I was a little older and could, when I first had this thought, like, well, I could practice major, melodic, minor, and diminished for the rest of my life. Right. Cool. Like, it was just really exciting. Yeah. I didn't like feel like I was missing anything.
Right.
But I am imagining, because I've heard this from other students, especially younger students that don't really know that you can get all these other things by accident from like a small set of goals.
Yeah.
But I could see someone being like, well, if I just practice 3 scales, major, minor, and diminished, well, how will I ever sound like so-and-so and like this modern wizardry, or how will I ever be like Freddie Hubbard or Train? And they were just super resourceful with like, probably, it's not like there was a shortage of information, but there was certainly like much less of it out there.
Yeah.
So like Train's famous for his thesaurus of scales he was practicing out of, and Yusef Lateef has a 400-page book. So clearly they had a lot of choices. But I think a lot of our heroes got all these crazy colors and futuristic space age ways of playing by like being maximally resourceful with a few things.
Yeah.
So I could see a young person, or maybe I felt once like, well, how will I get to this if I'm just practicing these scales? But then the more you do it, like all these shapes unfold, you just can't see until you see them. That's like everything else in life. You can't really predict it.
Right.
You just don't know until you know. And it just keeps on unfolding. All this stuff you could do with like simple, essential items. So like I just undertook practice of like major and minor scales and diminished stuff based on suggestions of people around me.
Right.
And no like concerted, I wasn't trying to change my vocabulary. I wasn't really transcribing much at all. I was just working out scale systems and spending time at the piano. And within weeks, my friends were like, what are you transcribing? Your language is really different. I really like that. Tell me what you're doing. And it felt really good in my life to not have to report a bunch of projects, but just be like, but pulling scales apart's kind of nice. There's not much to talk about, but
Was it news to you that they heard that in your playing?
Totally.
Cool.
Yeah.
I love that.
It was surprising and cool.
Yeah.
Because I thought I was undertaking like a 2-year journey at least before anything shows up. And just weeks later, they were like, wow, cool. What are you doing?
Right.
And it was nice to have a short thing to tell them rather than like, well, I've been checking out all this heavy.
Check it out, man. Yeah. Let me start by drawing a circle. Then I will split that circle into 17 equal parts.
Yeah. None of that for me.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. And the thing you said about Train, like we were having a discussion in one of our coaching calls in the jazz intensive with one of our students, Josh. And that was the thing that he sort of had the realization in real time. Is like, we're talking about the diminished scale. And he was like, okay, now I actually see what that famous Coltrane diminished pattern is. Like I actually see it in context of the scale. So that was a collateral benefit of finally understanding how the diminished scale was constructed.
Right.
So, this thing, and I've had this experience so many times in my life where I'll be playing and I'll hear like, okay, this is going to be the perfect place for this pattern. I'll get like 5 notes into the pattern and totally screw it up, and I can't recover because I don't actually know the underlying structure of what I was playing. So it's like I either can play this from the beginning to the end of it in the way that I know it, or I'm totally screwed.
Yeah, which kind of like means that you weren't there,
right,
for the learning of it, right?
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
we kind of farmed it out to the resource in front of us.
Or like the totally disembodied example we found in a solo.
Right.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because Coltrane, nobody taught him that. That's what I always think about. The people that we love so much and the source of so much of this, like, they did that.
On their own. Resourceful people.
So that pattern is a collateral benefit of probably him sitting for 12 hours a day, poring over diminished scales and looking at them from every single angle and playing them upside down and backwards and in every interval. But you just heard the end result of that and thought, and like, not talking down to anybody because this has been the majority of my life as a jazz musician. You thought I could just start at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, that happens to everybody.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between knowing and knowing.
It's like you said, you just don't know until you know.
It's impossible. Like, you know what I remember scoffing at was when a teacher told me in grad school, Brian Lynch, very well-known trumpet player, said, "Listen, young man, I would like you to put the C scale in thirds." You know, and he always called me young man. We thought I needed like a little boost, like just get me going.
You knew something heavy was coming after the young
Listen,
man.
young man. He was like, he printed something on his office printer. He was like, "Can you grab that from the printer?" And I grabbed it, and he was like, "You look a little sad about it. You want to share, young man?" And I was like, "It's the C scale, I see." And he was like, "Yeah, there's big lessons in here." So he made me play it in thirds. And I just, like, within 2 days, I realized, like, part of my issue, and it helped me with some, like, immediate trumpet stuff, some manipulation of data, and improvisation and composition stuff, like, almost immediately. But it was the thing that taught me this larger lesson about myself. And because I watched me say, yeah, I know what thirds are. They're thirds. I've been practicing scales, or I had done scales and thirds by age 8. Come on.
Of course.
Come on.
Yeah. It was in the back of the red book.
That's exactly Bruce Pearson's Standard of Excellence for elementary band.
Thanks, Bruce. Shout out.
There's no better book for K through 8 band. But yeah, because like a fact is knowable on paper, or like you've touched it and tasted it, or passed your high school final playing your A flat major scale in thirds, like that really dupes people into being like, check. So, you know, my teacher was like, "I think you should reconsider playing thirds every day." And then I came back. I didn't see him for 2 weeks because he was gone. When I came back, he was like, "Do you have a progress report for me?" And I was like, "My life is different and better forever."
That's awesome.
Because like so many unintended consequences, like chops, composing, and jazz related stuff, and just that big lesson about like, look how easy I thought I knew something, and if that's true for this, it's true for everything. Like, how many people can look over their friend's shoulder at the piano and be like, "Oh, word, yeah, I get that."
Yeah.
And then you actually walk away like a dolt, thinking you get that.
Yeah.
You know, because you could parrot that fact or write it down. Yeah. It doesn't mean you don't know shit, little boy.
Yeah, and you were a different person when somebody was like, "Hey man, practice some major thirds." Like, you were a much different person than when you were 8.
Right.
You know what I
mean? Like, thankfully, like, I wouldn't have been able to. I sometimes have. I sometimes don't appreciate the time it takes me to learn stuff, or how I feel like I am content with just a batch of things to work on, and I could do
Yeah.
that the rest of my life. Like,
Yeah.
I can easily see that as character flaw. But it also, I think, like it prepares me to receive lessons. Like, I sometimes feel like I should have been better younger, and I should still be doing all this stuff. But
Yeah.
I don't know, taking it slow without the burden of trying to feel like I need to be the next Miles Davis. You know, it's kind of nice because I feel like I was ready for this lesson where a more
Right.
like anxious and childlike brain would have not been able to understand the magic in playing the C scale in thirds, and
Yeah.
you know.
That so you were talking about some pretty like that's a big statement. Like, I started to realize like I don't need to be the next Miles Davis. We could even put that on like a much more easily digestible, or put that in a more easily digestible way, is that there's some sense of you have to be okay with your practice routine unfolding in front of you
Mm.
rather than planning it
Mm-hmm.
out for the next year. I'll work on this and then I'll get really good at that, and then I'll work on this, and then logically I'll work on this, and then it'll be this, and then you're setting yourself up for a lot of frustration by doing that. And you're also sort of locking yourself into the mindset of I'm not allowed to consider the things that I've discovered.
Right. Like, why
You
do
know,
so many people hate practicing?
right.
Like, up through like their whole life, even. Because if it's regimented, or you think it has to be like that, if you, that was a huge turning point for me. Is when I remember realizing in the practice room, like, look, I'm still really organized, and I'm I'm doing the same stuff every day, so I felt good about my plan.
Yeah.
But when things really started to feel good, I remember recognizing, like, oh, I leave room for myself in here. Like, I used to just farm all of that out to the resource or the teacher or the clock or the timer,
Right.
and now I found this nice compromise. Not like improvisation while I practice means like taking a solo,
Right.
but I find little avenues to pivot and change direction. Like, I get to assert my will in much lesser percentage, but
Yeah.
it's a way of like bringing myself to the practice that I never did before. It was just read the thing on the sheet, memorize it, do it as you learned it, do another thing.
Yeah.
And now there's like a little more playfulness about
Yeah.
allowing really me to
Yeah.
be there and pivot within a moment, not to a whole other exercise, but
Right.
let me try it this way, let me breathe this way, let me slow it down, let
Yeah.
me speed it up, let me do it up, let me do it down.
Some of the best stuff comes from that, I think, at least in my life. Some
And you
of the
can't
best.
do that until you just try, right? So if you sit down and say, I'm going to practice my scales ascending and then descending, and
Right.
then you're
Yeah.
just not leaving room for your own autopilot, like your brain to kick
Right.
on and direct that stuff, which is a lot like playing music on a bandstand, actually.
Totally. And this is all so like frustrating to talk about and think about, because it's like there's so much benefit to playing a scale ascending and descending. But at some point you've got to move on. You need a starting point for sure. But the thing, listening to you say what you just said, do you ever notice that there's like a distinct, with really great artists, I feel like, particularly the ones where we can see like their entire recorded output for literally their entire lives. Do you feel like the really, really great ones, there's some sense where they get to a certain point and it feels like they're more of like a conduit? It's like they're not trying anymore.
Yeah.
And it's more like everything's just flowing through them because they've lived so much life, they've done so much work, they care about it so much, they're so developed
Yeah.
that it's almost like a transition where it's like you can almost feel they weren't even trying.
Yeah. Yeah. I think anyone can do it if you get lost in it. Like, I think getting lost in it in a cool way, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
losing your
Right.
commanding kind of self.
Yeah.
Like just before I came here today, I have to play drums this weekend,
Mm-hmm.
and I haven't played a lot of drums recently,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm a little bit scared.
Yeah.
So I took out a drum pad for 15 minutes, and like I could barely play with the metronome, and then
Right.
like once I got with it, but it was cool that it was on this unfamiliar instrument,
Right.
kind of. And I just went from feeling like physically in pain and stiff and stupid and not playing with the metronome to like being more successful. And then at a certain point, I lost track of what time it was, and I was just playing with the metronome. I got lost in it, and I can imagine there's still a little bit of a light on to make some choices without being really that involved in it.
Yeah.
So I know that for an instrument like piano or drums, where you can actually just keep playing for a little while, I found myself it's a little easier to lose myself there than when I'm always going away and coming back with phrases and breath and lips and stuff. But yeah, I imagine that the more you can just repeat and stay stuck in something and cycle through something, you just kind of lose yourself in it. And
well, I see the, like, you know, when I was thinking about those musicians, you know, Coltrane comes to mind and Miles Davis, where it's like they were just at such another level that I almost think about them as just like a conduit of whatever energy in the universe is, you know, working upon us. And that seems to me as like another collateral benefit of a lifetime of searching and practicing. Yeah. And it's not that they stopped. Like famously, Coltrane was just always evolving, always. But I do feel like his later recorded work, it just feels less like he was trying and more like he was channeling in the most beautiful way. And I think sort of if I could get more meta here as my personal last thought in this conversation is like I finally feel like I have a meditation practice, which has taken me a really long time to get to this point. Shout out to Sam Harris for the Waking Up app, because it's really changed everything for me. But the principle of meditation is so simple, which is just like sit and do nothing. The collateral benefits are like insane. I can see them everywhere in my life.
Yeah.
With my daughter, with every relationship I have in my life, with the way I treat myself, with the way I approach music. I think that might be the ultimate collateral benefit in my life.
Amen. Yeah. Yeah, that exploded my brain because I'm trying to think of a musical analog to doing nothing like that, you know? It really does require the 10,000 hours because you have to be able to you have to be able to go up and down the C scale in time without thinking about the notes, but we also need to know exactly what note you're on, and it just needs to be like so recessed within you that it's just like you're hanging out breathing,
right?
And everything else comes out, you know?
Right.
I know when I'm practicing a lot, if I do something right, like the next question is like, well, what did that cost me? You know, yeah, I did the thing, but like, did I strain in my body? Was I actually really thinking hard to produce that? Or did I just go and do it? Like, was my posture really forced? So I was like, or did I really just relaxed and almost look like Drunken Master style, like, you know, like the old Zach Lang on the chair.
Yeah.
what does it cost? Am I only capable of doing this because I'm fully upright, feeling like a military soldier?
Right.
Or is it because these variables were helping me? So I found by subbing out variables and changing variables, I can wean myself off them eventually, kind of. So hopefully any chore musically just doesn't cost you much in terms of thought or stress or bodily energy. So I'm imagining that once your playing's at a certain level, fundamentally, it's like and your neck strap's at the right height and whatnot. It's like you don't even feel the horn. You just breathe in and breathe out.
Right.
And all the stuff can happen.
Yeah. Becomes part of your body, or an extension of your body. So I think just thinking about never get too frustrated in the practice room. Like if a teacher's making you work on something that you don't want to work on, or like you see it necessary to work on something that you hate because you know that like, well, I need to do this. Like it's some basic part of my musicianship that's lacking. Don't get too down, because there's probably countless collateral benefits that you don't even know are working in the background.
Well, that voice inside that says, I need to do this, is like kind of like why we're all screwed up,
Yep.
What you need to do is just practice something. But like when we have a list of what we think is the coolest thing to practice, or like, this is what Chris Potter said he did and this is what Ambrose Akinmusri said, and this is what my teacher said, and this is what the video said, and this is what, you know what I mean? There's just, especially now, there's like a million vectors all pointing at each person.
Yep.
And every person on the internet and every college, and everyone says, you got to do this. And that's just a lot of pressure. It's like probably why I didn't practice. This was even before much internet when we were young.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't sort through a hierarchy of anything. I didn't know you should just take the simple stuff and get cracking.
Yeah, and it's only about to get worse, right? I mean, there's only more information every second.
Hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like there's like 1 billion hours of content uploaded to YouTube like every
which honestly
hours.
I like, because I don't care. It's like I am just smart enough to do this, and like adequately dumb enough where I've always been like, well, I got a pretty big timeline for this project. I remember there was once when I was like 19 or 20, I was like, by the time I'm 25, I'm going to move to New York and I'm going to be this amount of good.
Yeah, wow.
And then I remember I turned 26 and I was like, well, yeah.
Oh, well.
No big deal. I got, hopefully.
You didn't know that it wouldn't be a big deal.
Yeah, I could like force myself to think about it and be like,
yeah,
maybe you should. But we get to have musically fruitful lives.
Totally.
I am good enough to be helpful musically, and I'm bad enough to always have something to do.
Yep.
So I just don't. The weight of the internet doesn't bother me much musically, because I'm like, well, I can just cherry pick one thing Adam Manis or Peter Martin said today and practice that for a decade.
Totally.
It doesn't overwhelm me like I could absolutely seeing it overwhelming me 10 or 15 years ago.
Right. So I think like many of the people watching this will notice that I've really shifted a lot of my online presence to just like, let's go, let's do something.
Nick wants to start a cult with me.
Yeah.
He said, I'll be
We're
the brains.
Founding members.
He said, I'll be the brains. You go out there and drum up some cult members. So we'll be coming to a city near you soon, probably on the street.
Yeah. Yeah, Chris will be on the street outside of your apartment shouting complete nonsense.
I'll have some
within
pamphlets,
the next
some stationery.
Yeah.
Maybe some information on a QR code.
He'll be playing really loud, descending, dominant scales at you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wearing a white linen kind of thing.
No, no, you shouldn't do
Little
that.
beads.
Well, listen, we'll talk about the mechanics of the cult a little bit after we turn off the cameras.
Yeah. I have this feeling like maybe you were making like a kind or sensitive point, like
No,
something good for a person to say.
no,
When I said all that stuff.
it was just the whole spirit of this conversation is just like let the thinking happen from a place of action. So just take action first and think after you've taken action. And for me, and I think for you, it just puts you into a completely different frame of mind and is way more empowering.
Yeah.
Right?
And it seems like the pressure's off. Sky's the limit. Pressure's off. As long as I do something,
right,
it will unfold into, and then that's kind of creativity. Like the more you just start a thing and see it unfold, you start to be able to call the shots in a seemingly binary, tiny way. Like, I'm gonna take a left here, take a right here.
Yep.
And you can really tip an exercise or a scale or whatever you're practicing towards a number of goals that you have.
Yeah.
You know, there is a bit of agency that you
Totally.
can have there.
Sometimes when I'm really in my mind and anxiety ridden, when I'm about to practice, I will literally, I'm looking at the door of this room, I will literally walk through the door and walk back in and imagine myself putting down some heavy suitcases and like leaving them at the door.
Nice.
And yeah, and then I get to work on the cult.